Welcome to our live Q&A. Tonight we're going to be talking about planting times and when we plant things. There's been a lot of questions over the years, and it's a lot of people asking the question, and they say, what can I plant before my last frost date? So that is our subject for tonight. That's the main thing we'll be talking about. We have an open house coming up in 2 days on Saturday. So if you're in the area of northern Nevada, then you can come here on January 27th, see the greenhouse, see the soil laboratory, and ask me any questions about all the things that we do here. There's 9 ways that we help people to grow the most nutritious food in the world. We have a YouTube channel. We do our weekly Q&A on Thursday nights. We have a Patreon channel for those who want early access of our YouTube videos. I'm a soil laboratory to look for the living, active microbes in your soil to help you create a functioning soil. And with functioning soils, you get the healthiest food. We have a class that's called the Georgic Schoolroom. It's 4 months long in the summertime. The picture on the screen here are students from last year who came and were a part of that. I do personal consulting for people with their farms and ranches and gardens. And I published a book this last year called Worry-Free Eating. And of course, we have a newsletter that goes out whenever we have something to say. So if you go to my website, georgicrevolution.com, you can get signed up for the newsletter. On these Thursday night classes, we're going to be having book discussions on February 22nd through May 16th. And we're going to be talking about some of the best classics out there on the idea of regenerative agriculture and all that implies. Regenerative is somewhat a buzzword nowadays. It just means what organic used to mean before the USDA got a hold of it and made it mean things that it didn't mean in the early days. And so, but we're going to be talking about these titles. So if you want to read these books before our discussions, we will be reading The Winter Room, One Straw Revolution, As a Man Thinketh, Green Grass in the Spring, A Message to Garcia, Searching for Home, Finding Grace, The Strangest Secret, 12 Rules for Life, Holistic Management, Dirt to Soil, and Worry-Free Eating. And then the last one is The Lessons of History. And there's about 40 other books we ought to be reading, but the winter is not that long. So these are the ones I picked for this year. Next year, we'll probably pick a completely different set, which will be super fun. The summer class, I always like to mention this specifically because this is where people can come here, and it's for any age adults, 18 and up. Anybody can come here. We have housing, we have food, we have a class for you for 4 months during the summer. We have a garden plot for you that's 15 feet wide, 50 feet long. I mentor you personally on how to grow the garden, and then the last month of class, you are feeding yourself and helping to feed your other students because you can trade. And that way, when you leave, you have the confidence that you know you can grow your own food, and you've known how to create the soil to make the most nutritious food. So we focus on all the big buzzwords out there, but we don't care about the buzzword. We care about the farmers who are doing these methods that have the greatest, the greatest results, the greatest good things happening on their farm. So the biodynamic people, they have the very best soils. The permaculture people, they have the very best designs for ecological literacy. The regenerative people, they are the ones that are restoring the depleted soils. Now, a lot of these people do all of these things, and why are they arguing? I don't know, but a lot of times if you go to, say, a certain place like a permaculture thing, they will say, oh yeah, the biodynamic people, they're not as good as we are. It's silly because they're all fantastic, but nobody's teaching at all. So what I did in this class is I took all of this information as an umbrella, and I teach all of these things. So we take the very best of the best, and we study the authors, the farmers, the people who have these results, and then we talk about it in the classroom, and we put those things into practice in your garden while you're here, so that when you go home, you have complete confidence in your own food production. Okay, on to our major point for tonight, which is how soon can we plant in the springtime? So a lot of times people have charts and they have maps, they have calendars, they have planting dates and all that stuff. And those things are good, but I never teach that and show that. Well, sometimes I do, but it's very seldom, because I teach people all over the world. I've had people from every climate on my classes before. So in little classes like this, where we have small groups, I simply show the principle. So I divide the crops into two groups. If the frost kills it, so if it gets down to, like, even if it's close to freezing, like, 30, 33 degrees is close to freezing, 32 is freezing. So if the temperature drops to that and it dies, then it is a warm season crop. And so I only grow those things in the spring, summer, and fall, when those plants are not going to die. So I work with a lot of people with greenhouses and cold frames and other ways of growing crops through the winter. So don't even try to grow the things that are on the warm season list. And those are things like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, eggplants, sweet potatoes, all of the melons, all squashes, basil, turmeric, ginger. All of those types of plants are very susceptible to frost. If it even thinks of getting close to freezing, they are not doing well. In fact, if your night temperatures are below 50 degrees, a lot of these plants totally shut down. That's why people in the Intermountain West who are above, say, 5,000 feet in elevation, in the high mountain, high desert areas, they struggle to ripen tomatoes, because every night for most of the summer, it gets below 50 degrees. It's very hard to grow a nice crop of tomatoes because you're getting cool. So warm season crops. Go ahead and start your seeds for these warm season crops. Most of these you're going to start between 6 and 8 weeks before your last spring frost date. So where I live, my last spring frost last year was June 15th. The year before that, it was June 10th. And some years we have our first killing frost in the fall, in the last week of August. That gives us an incredibly short growing season for warm season crops. So my major warm season crops would be tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and that's pretty much it. I grow those inside a large greenhouse that I built. I don't even try to grow them outside, although we had some tomato plants outside and we got 2 or 3 ripe tomatoes on them last year. But we should have had 20 or 30 off of each plant, not 2 or 3. But we always put some outside just to see what'll happen. Okay, cool season crops. These are plants that I grow. And so I grow them like in all 4 seasons, but I focus on growing them spring, fall, and winter in most climates. Although in my climate, most of our night temperatures are below 50 degrees at night. So all of these things on this cool season list, they do pretty good here. So if you're trying to grow broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, lettuce, spinach, those kinds of things don't do well if your night temperatures are high and then your day temperatures are really hot. So for this chart's really for most gardening areas, but for my gardening area, I can grow the cool season in the summer also. So anyway, yeah, cool season. Cool season are crops that can be frosted, not frozen solid, but frosted, so down to around 25 degrees, maybe 23 for some things. And when they thaw out the next day, they just keep on growing. No, they're not growing fast in those cold temperatures, but they do keep on growing. So with the person who has a greenhouse and they're serious about growing food year round, then what's happening here with the cool season ones, you can grow these all year round in your greenhouse, unless it's summer and you get really hot in your greenhouse. But so that just depends on your climate. Okay, let me just look at this list real quick and think about it. Broccoli, cabbage, onions, potatoes. Okay, so potatoes, we're going to plant those directly in the ground, a piece of a potato. And then garlic, we're going to plant those directly in the ground, just a garlic clove. Everything here can get planted different times of year except garlic. Garlic, you would plant garlic in the fall. September, October, November. That's the time of planting garlic. And then everything else, pretty much you're going to be planting those. You'll be planting these seeds to start transplants like about 8 weeks before your last frost date. So let's say your last frost date is May 1st. So you're going to be planting these around, March, 1st of March, all the way to the end of March. And that's going to put you, 4 to 8 weeks before you're putting stuff outside. These can handle some light frost. So in some climates in the United States, if you know for sure that you're going to be having warm soil and no frost, say, that in April sometime, get this stuff planted right now in January. And then you can get this stuff out and going because a lot of these things can handle some frost. So if you do have some frost and these are already out in the garden, you can cover them up with blanket. You could string a row of outdoor incandescent lights to give them a little warmth, and then put a little tent over them. There's all kinds of things you can do to help keep the frost off of plants. And it's not something you do every day, but let's say you get it out there, you think the weather's settled, and then there's a freak cold snap. And so I'm talking about covering them for 1 or 2 nights. So you want to wait late enough in the year that you don't have to cover them all the time. Because if it's freezing all the time, they're going to be kind of stressed and not growing very fast anyway. So usually our crops do better if you wait to transplant 2 weeks later than you want to. That has been my experience most of the time. Okay, let's let's open this up for Q&A right now. I just want to remind you that this Q&A is brought to you, sponsored by Survival Garden Seeds. They're a fantastic company. My friend Jason has that company, and he puts seeds out for everybody to have available. And they're fantastic. I have a greenhouse right now filled with seeds from this company. So I'm going to stop my screen share, and we can go ahead and you guys can unmute and ask me any questions you want. I'm sorry my camera's not on tonight. I'm having trouble with it. I ordered a new one a couple of days ago, but it hasn't got here yet.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
This is Julianne. I have questions about your worm bins. I've heard good things about how you're making your compost and that it's pretty straightforward and fast. Would you mind talking about that?
For sure. First of all, have you been to my YouTube channel and watched the video about my worm bin? I think I have two or
I've
three of them.
I've been through the channel and I was looking at some of the top videos, but I don't think I'd made it as far down as the worm bins.
Okay, yeah, there's years of videos on there, so it might be hard to find, but uh, yeah. So it's a box. I'm trying to think if there was a picture I could think of, I would pull it up and screen share it, but I don't even know where that is, so I'm sorry. But I'll just tell you about it. It's made out of a plywood box. It has plywood sides. It's 4 feet wide and it's 16 feet long. And then the base of it has three 2x12s, one on each side and then one down the middle. And then in those 2x12s, I drilled a hole every 4 inches and I put in a 1 inch rod, just a steel rod that's round. And then
Mhm.
I put paper, just like paper sacks or cardboard, something like that, uh, on the on the floor, because the floor
Mhm.
has 4 inch holes in it, right? And so that's
Okay.
why the cardboard's on it. And then the floor is about 2 feet off the ground, and then underneath of it there's a concrete pad. And so on top of the cardboard, that's where I put all my compost in. So I just put in finished compost. So I make a thermophilic compost, which means a hot compost. So I
Yeah.
get 60% browns, 30% greens, and 10% high nitrogen, 50 to 60% moisture. And then in 4 or 5 days, I have a compost thermometer that I maintain it with, or watch it with. And when it gets up to at least 131 Fahrenheit for 3 days, or 150 for 2 days, or 160 for 24 hours, those are our temperature thresholds. Then I take it apart and I will turn it with a pitchfork and introduce lots of new oxygen, maintain the moisture. If we need to add moisture, we add some,
Mm-hmm.
keep it at 50 to 70%. And then we just put it back together and mix it all up thoroughly. And then and then I watch it, and it's just the same temperature threshold. So I'm either turning it one day, 2 days, or 3 days later, depending on the temperature. And so I do that for a period of maybe 5 to 12 times. Usually it's about 7, 8 turns is average. When it doesn't heat up to 131 anymore, I know it's about to mature. And then I will turn it so say I've turned it 8 times, and then the temperature gets up to 125. The next day it's 127, and the next day it's 124. Well, see, it's not getting to my threshold to turn.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And so at that point we know that it's got to the point where it is completely like it's done with that thermophilic stage. So I will wait about 3 more days, and it's hanging around 100 to 120 degrees, right? That's normally what happens. Also, although other things could happen. But so it's about 5, 6, 7 days when I'm watching this temperature never reach threshold. At that point, I will turn it one more time to introduce more oxygen. And when I turn it at that time, that is when I normally put it on top of my worm bin. Now,
Okay.
the worm bin and you don't turn the worm bin. So the worm bin
Mm-hmm.
has about 1.5 to 2 feet of compost in it, and it's filled with what they call red wigglers. It's actually Icenia fedeta is the Latin name. That's the proper name of the worm, but nobody wants to speak Latin. So we call them red wigglers because it's funner, I guess. And they are composting worms. And so they eat all this material, and a worm bin of vermicompost will make any compost better than it was when you put it in there. So it will be in this worm bin for about a year to a year and a half. So I have a knife that goes on the bottom of the worm bin, and it cuts off about a half an inch of compost at a time. And so I will cut that off about 4 times a year. And so at the bottom of the compost bin, that worm bin, is where that finished product comes out. And then I analyze it with my microscope, and I do a count of the biomass of whatever biology is in there. Of course, I'm looking for bad guys. If there's bad guys, that's a disaster. And there never has been because we manage it correctly and we know the principles of how to do that. So it's not a problem. But if you just go to somebody's compost pile in the backyard and it's not really a compost, it's just a putrefied, reducing waste situation. Municipal landfills are the worst. You go there to get compost on the free compost day, and there's flies everywhere, and it stinks to high heaven. Man, they should pay you to take that stuff away because what you're
Yeah.
bringing home are disease causers. You're bringing home the spirochetes and spirilla, and there's all the things that cause disease in your plants, in your animals, your pets. You could get sick because you don't know what's in there
Yeah.
because it's been anaerobic. So the idea of the
Yeah.
worm bin is it's totally aerobic, very highly oxygenated. Uh, so we analyze it with the microscope, and we look and see we're looking for any bad guys, and if there are, then that's a problem. If there, but we want to see that there is a minimum number of the good guys. We want to have a large population of beneficial fungus, a large population of beneficial bacteria, and we want to have a lot of diversity. So we don't just want a large population of one species. We want a large population of hundreds and hundreds of species. The more diversity, the better. We just want to make sure that the morphology or shape of them are the ones that we know are the good aerobic ones that will do the mineralizing or drive the mineral cycle. Um, and so anyway, that's where we are. We also want to see protozoa. We want to see beneficial nematodes. It's fantastic if we see microarthropods. We generally don't see microarthropods. Those show up later in the system. And so yeah, so there's a rundown. Do you have any specific questions about the worm bin other than that?
Do you turn it by hand, where it's 4 by 16? Are you turning it by hand, or do you have something like a little tractor that's helping you turn it?
Okay, so the worm bin never gets turned. The only time we
Or
turn
sorry, not
compost is when it's in the thermophilic stage before it goes in the worm bin. Here's why we don't turn it for the last year and a half of its life. The fungus that we want to grow, fungus is one of the most beneficial things in our soils. It's fantastic what it does. But the they call it fungal hyphae. Those are the little strands in the compost or in your soil, and they're kind of like a spider web. They're very long. You can't really see them. Sometimes you can see some, but it would be hundreds of thousands or millions of them piled up around each other if you can see it with the naked eye. But like a single hyphae is, let me think. It's probably like a hundred times thinner than a human hair. So it's so thin you can't see it, but they can be hundreds of miles long. So that blows our mind. I mean, think of a redwood tree. It's very long, like hundreds of feet tall, and very big around. Now think of a Douglas fir tree, very tall but big around. Now think of a telephone pole. It's still really tall, but it's much smaller around. You can get your arms around most telephone poles, right? But now think of a rope.
yeah,
Be very long, but very small around. Now think of a fishing twine and put that fishing twine. Let's take 500 feet of fishing twine and put it across the park. And then you go to the other side of the street. You're not going to see it. And that's how the fungal
right.
hyphae is. It's 100 or 200 times smaller than that in diameter, except it's extremely long. Why am I telling you this? Because if you turn your compost, once you start growing your large amount of beneficial fungus, every time you turn it, you are killing a lot of your beneficial fungus. So fungus is not done until it has aged without being turned for about a year.
So what about the actual, sorry, the thermophilic, or the thermal
Yeah, yeah, thermophilic is
composting
right. Yeah.
process?
Yeah, so
Your
I just do
are
that
you
with pitchfork. I usually just have small batches. Although we do have a couple of bigger batches here on the ranch, and we turn those with a front end loader of a tractor. But if you want to do a really good job, you just need a pile that's about 100 5-gallon buckets worth of material. That makes a pretty good sized pile. But it's manageable with your the just with a pitchfork and a wire cage, just a piece of wire fencing. So I mean,
so about how much, like how many cubic feet are you turning at a time? Um I'm trying to kind of grasp in my head what this would look like
yeah,
in
yeah,
my garden, how many times I'm going out to turn it. Am I taking it from how many cubic feet am I in order to actually get it? Because the one I use now, I don't turn it. I have red wrigglers in it, but we're trying to produce more compost faster, better finished.
yeah. So I'm not sure on the cubic feet, but like the piece of wire I use, when it's put together, it's like 5 feet tall. Actually, it's not. It's four
Okay.
feet tall, and then I make a circle out of it, and it's about 4 feet across when I
Mhm.
wire it together, and I fill that completely up,
So it's not,
and it's between 75 5-gallon buckets and 100 5-gallon buckets of material.
and at those dimensions, it's actually heating up. That's
Oh
such
yeah.
a small pile.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So
In fact, you could.
are you
I've done piles that are 30 buckets, and if your ingredients are really good, it will heat up.
right?
So
Are
it's
you adding any kind of accelerant? Like I use like compost tea sometimes when I start my compost, and it just seems to help. Are you using any kind of accelerant like that?
no, not really, because I have really good sources of high nitrogen. Like I
Yeah.
have alfalfa hay, I have alfalfa manure that has gone through milk cows. I have chicken manure. Uh, if I have a chicken that dies and I'm doing a compost, I will save that chicken.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll put the dead chicken in a plastic bag and throw it in the freezer, and then you wait a couple of
Hmm.
weeks till you're ready to put it together, and then you put the dead chicken in there. It sounds a little weird and morbid, but a dead chicken is one of the best things as a starter for the compost.
Yeah.
They work
We've used
fantastic.
I've used duck carcasses before, and recently we took all the internal organs of a sheep and put it in ours. I have some autoimmune issues that make it difficult for me to do a lot of really aggressive manual labor, and so I'm trying to wrap my head around what I have that would be light enough for me to turn it that many times to help it accelerate. I use a lot of wood chips,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and
Well,
manures and
hey,
things like that.
yeah. Okay, here's the deal. You don't have to do a thermophilic compost. When I look at composts with my microscope, a lot of the composts that are out there that people do have never been turned.
Hmm.
But the reason I say to do a thermophilic one is it's the fastest way to get a large volume, because in like let's say your thermophilic stage is like say 6 weeks, and then
Hmm.
you age it for 3 months, you will have a pretty good population that you can make uh, a good extract to get out there to introduce microbes into your environment. And we're talking 4 or 5 months you can do that. So that's the fastest way is with thermophilic. If you use
And you
other methods, the fastest way that I've seen is like 12 months.
right. So you're taking your thermophilic compost once it's ready, you're feeding it through or allowing the red wrigglers to live in and somewhat more digest. And so what you're putting in your actual garden is the liquid from the worms, or is it the finished compost at the bottom that you're cutting off?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There's a lot of ways you can use it. Here's what I do. I cut off the bottom of that worm bin, and then I will use the like a softball sized amount of
Hmm.
compost, and I'll put that in a 5 gallon bucket to make an extract, and then that covers a garden bed. It's about 3 feet wide and 100 feet long to inoculate with microbes.
And how often are you applying that?
It depends on your soil health program, but if you do it correctly, you need to do that anywhere from 1 to six times, and then you never do it again, ever.
And is it okay for foliar, or are you doing it without any plants in the dirt?
So it's totally fine for foliar, unless it has any disease causers in it. But you should know that by the color and the smell. When you smell it, it should have no odor at all. Zero odor. If there is an odor, then it would smell really good like a forest floor.
Okay.
But even then, that worries me because usually the things giving off odors are anaerobic creatures. So if
And
there's no
so,
odor, then it is safe to eat.
okay. And I, our climate sounds like your climate. We're zone 3, 4. Some years we get a milder winter, but our last frost date is June 28th, and
Okay.
we're getting our first frost date probably at the end of September, early October.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, how are you keeping your worm bins from freezing? Is it in your Walpini?
Yes.
So you've got something that just keeps them a little bit above freezing. Is it keeping them warm at night, or
So
is the compost
yeah.
itself?
So there's no heater in my greenhouse, but
Okay.
I mean you've seen pictures of it and probably seen
Uh-huh.
videos, but uh, so I just cut it down in the ground. I built that 10 foot tall boulder wall that's on the north side, so it
Hmm.
catches the sunlight in the wintertime. It always gets warm in there. Last year was pretty cold. We had some really cold snaps last winter. This winter hasn't been so bad, but last winter we had 2 nights in a row that were 20 below zero, and uh, the days like around that time where
Hmm.
the highs were maybe in the 20s, like low 20s,
So
and
still pretty
it
warm.
still got
Yeah.
above freezing in there during the day. And during those cold weeks, like 3 weeks of super cold weather last winter, we never had the ground freeze anywhere in there.
That's
So,
really interesting.
so it's perfect for all of those cool season crops. And
Mm-hmm.
then the worms were just fine. I mean, it didn't freeze at all. So,
Okay. That's fantastic. I don't know that we can do that here because we've got subwater out at the garden we're working on, so we can't really dig down very far, but we're trying to find some other solutions that aren't dependent on electricity. So
yeah, yeah, nice.
anyway, well, that definitely piques my interest to go see what it looks like. I think I have a pretty good picture in my mind, but I'm definitely going to go look at the videos.
Yeah,
That's exciting.
yeah. How far are you from us?
Remind me,
So
I
we're
don't think
we're a 3 hour drive on I-80 from Salt Lake.
um I am
And you're in
I'm
Idaho, right?
actually yeah, I'm only 15 minutes from Jason. And
Yeah,
so we're up in Idaho Falls area.
yeah. Okay, yeah. Well, we're 3 hours from the Salt Lake area. So anyway,
Mhm.
you ought to come see it sometime.
Yeah, that's what he says. He's trying to get me to come out and be able to take some classes from you. And it
Yeah,
sounds we've
that's
got Walpinis up here, but they're little compared to what you've got. I've got two neighbors with Walpinis, but
fun.
they're little. They're not very big.
Yeah,
And
you,
it
you
sounds
know, yeah. You know what the problem is with little greenhouses? They're not a big enough mass to hold
yeah,
the heat through enough hours of the night until the sun comes up the next day. So
yeah.
bigger greenhouses are a better thing.
Well, and I think the light starts to be a factor too, is that when it's so small, everything's competing for light because you're mostly wall. You don't have a lot of open space, so mostly wall, lots of shadow.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's no good.
but yeah, it looks like you're doing fun things. My big thing is hotbeds. I build really, really big hotbeds and then put hoops over it. So I have hotbed greenhouses and it works really well. The red wrigglers are really happy in it, but I can't harvest anything from it without having to dismantle the greenhouse because I built it up around the hotbeds.
Mm,
So we need some faster compost uh, methods.
yeah. All right, cool. Kathy, do you have any questions tonight?
No, I don't. Thank you.
All right. All right, Julianne, anything else?
I'm just gonna go. I think I'm gonna go watch a bunch of your videos and come up with some more questions for next week. But I appreciate your thoroughness.
Okay. All right. Well, fantastic. Okay, everybody have a fantastic evening, and hopefully this has helped you to have the very best garden of your entire life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.